I don't think management has to be like the next step of success for someone, right? I think, and that's something that we've really looked at our org too, because I've seen it happen in other news orgs. There have been a lot of really good reporters who have been turned into bad editors, right? And editor is like a pseudonym for manager in a lot of traditional senses, but that doesn't always have to be true either. You can you can be an editor and not give them 15 direct reports if that's not a skill set.
Yes.
And if you do have someone who's good at leading people and things like that, there is management that doesn't have to be, in the traditional box, and you can
Hmm.
manage processes too. I think, you know, innovation's a buzzword, but innovation really is change management, right? It's managing change. And there's a lot of ways to do that without leading a team of, 10 direct reports.
Hi, Ross. Welcome to our Lead for Performance podcast. We are so thrilled to have you.
Yeah. Hi, Sandra. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ross Maghielse.
McGill's, there you go.
Thank you so much. Deputy Managing Editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I just was saying to Ross how excited I am to find out about leadership and performance development in a fast-hitting newsroom these days. So I'm so excited to learn more about how you handle this in your industry. But let's get started just by asking you a little bit to introduce yourself and your role, especially how it pertains to team and leadership development in a high-pressure news organization.
Yeah, sure. So I am a deputy managing editor here at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We're the largest news organization in Pennsylvania, and we're an independently owned legacy news org, as the term goes, but one that's been rapidly changing and evolving out of necessity and technology and all of that. I do focus specifically on kind of the technical and innovation type spaces and how we are modernizing for a digital future and really digital present that we're in. So things like how we distribute our journalism across all digital platforms rolls up under me, whether that's our owned and operated, homepage, mobile apps, and also things like social platforms, newsletters, Google and everything that's happening there. And then AI and how we're talking about that and considering the implications of that, which is still very much a work in progress, is all within the realm of things I focus on. And then I do manage a core newsroom team. It's a team of journalists that touch all those different platforms in different ways, whether they're making, Instagram reels and breaking down our stories that way, or they're writing more robust email newsletters. I manage a team of journalists in the newsroom and serve as kind of liaison between the newsroom and all parts of the company. News orgs traditionally have been pretty separate between like kind of the journalist and the business side. That has become, much closer in recent years, but there's still some distinction in there. And so I kind of serve as a liaison role for the Inquirer.
Oh, interesting. That's a really great and helpful introduction. So not only are you and your teams are at the mercy of the news and demand that's coming from the outside, but there's so much change that's coming driven from the inside to take advantage of the new technologies and all the things that you mentioned. So the team is probably being, I like to talk about it, squeezed in both directions in every which way. So that certainly creates for a high pressure environment. And I know in general, even journalism industry is very much notorious for high demand, susceptible, like all of us, to burnout and performance challenges. So, how do you maintain the intensity and the quality that the breaking news demands while protecting your teams from all the pressures and the road to burnout?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that there's a formulaic answer
Sure.
for it. It's part of it's knowing people and trying to manage their workloads, and also prioritization is a big piece of it. And I do think journalists working in current newsrooms have gotten good at adaptation, and have gotten good at, responding to constant change, just because in our business in particular, like a 5-year plan does not and cannot exist. The rise of AI was not on our radar like this in 2019 or whatever it was, right? So that's something that evolved very quickly. And there's endless examples of that. And you just try to listen to people and not overload them. Another thing that I've really prioritized building my team at the Inquirer is versatile skill sets. So you can give people a break at different times. Where it's nice to have areas of focus. I'm certainly open to people with specialist areas too, where they're really good at something. But I do intentionally look and try to build out a team, and we've done this here at the Inquirer, where there's a lot of versatility, where even if it's not someone's core job, if the person in that core job is running on fumes, I can move someone over and they can handle it for a spell,
Nice.
even if that's not necessarily what they were hired to do as their main
Hmm.
responsibility. So that's something that has helped. I think a lot of news orgs are looking for that. And in some ways, it makes it more challenging to work in the news business because you have to do different things. But once you reach that point and have a critical mass of versatile people, it makes everyone's lives a little easier. So that's been one tool we've really built over time, and it's at a place that's pretty good for us right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really great. It sounds like you're ready for these challenges, which is a big key. And I heard you mention prioritization, versatility, and then also be ready for the things you're by definition not going to be ready for. I wonder actually if that serves you also really well in this environment, because some organizations or industries are used to being, clear roadmap for 5 years, and that's probably never was the case for you. So kind of by design, people are ready for the chaos of it all that we're like most of us are finding ourselves in these days.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have like long-term directions and things
Yeah,
we
of
know we need to
course.
do, but it does change so rapidly, and we have to be responsive. And there's that balance between being responsive, but also not just purely reactionary. So it's a delicate mix at times, but
Fair, fair. So I heard you say that you're listening to your teammates and people when they put up their hand and things like that. But is there any, which is great, but is there any things that you look out for or you can share with us from past experience that you've noticed that could be kind of early signs or signals that change is needed? In the case sometimes the person is not even aware, but others can see it or something like that. You can share with us what you look for in the newsroom.
yeah. Sure. I mean, in addition to kind of like burnout in the traditional sense, something, I'm mindful of too is like change fatigue, which is like, someone they're not, burnout of the job, they're still focused, but they are, and, this happens to teams too as a whole, like, starting to get spent on this idea of like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and looking for that and seeing if there's either additional resources you can pivot towards or, being mindful too you don't have to accomplish everything all at once. There's a lot of demand and there's some things you absolutely have to do, but not everything does have to happen all at once, even if it needs to happen eventually. And so you try to look for that and you're constantly assessing, or at least I constantly assess like the ROI of something. And, is it truly, an absolute necessity within the next, you know, quarter or the next few months to get this done, or can it, wait? And then can we alleviate it and you get the better result that way? But we spend a lot of time talking, that's the other thing, there's a lot of communication in our business because there has to be because it's constantly moving. There aren't, people aren't scrolled away, like, at a desk kinda for days or even, like, 6 hours at a time, not interacting with anyone. There's a lot of open communication, so
That's great.
that makes that process a little easier too.
That's great. It's wonderful to hear you talk about as a leader to talk about not everything has to be done at once and to really talk about prioritization, assessing the ROI. Is that something that you find is common sense? Or is this something that you're, this kind of line of thinking, you're bringing a lot into the newsroom and as a leader into the organization, and sometimes even sharing with other leaders? Because certainly I know that there is a prevalent notion of everything does have to be done at once.
Yeah.
It's just the way the state of the world is today. So I just wonder, how do you find that in people's minds with that? Or is that business as usual?
Yeah, a lot of times it is, researching it, and one thing about it, we're an audience-driven business, so there's a lot of audience data that we have and audience trends that we can look at, and we listen to our audience, right? So that helps inform some of those decisions. So there could be something that is seen as a company initiative or something we know we wanna do, but if there's not a tangible, immediate audience impact for it, or there's not an audience demand, that might be something that, tilts something in favor of it happening. If we
Great.
if
So
we
that's
want.
this actually becomes a prioritization tool that you can use, and it must be
Absolutely, yeah.
okay. And then that's really great. And of course, even elevating it out of the newsroom, like every organization ultimately has customers, right? In your case,
Mhm.
it's the audience member, but having such a direct, measurable impact or voice of the customer that you can use to prioritize, back in behind the scenes is actually probably a very powerful tool to use in general.
Yeah, it is, and, we get different signals from different places with audience too, so that's a useful guide for that, and generally speaking, the audience tends to win out. Serving the audience wins out, right? And
So
we
as it
try to.
should, right? Customers, right? Customers
Yeah,
always right.
it's similar to that, yes. So we look at that, constantly, and what's nice is, at least on my team, there's a term audience development that's become more common in newsrooms over years. A lot of people on my team have come through some audience development role at some point in their careers, so they are used. It's not like they're being handed a report. They're used to that, and they're kind of doing it on their own too, and naturally paying attention to those signals. So
Oh,
the
that's a really
awareness is pretty
cool.
high.
I think that that's a really good link to identify to the audience. This direct link to the outcome, the ultimate outcome, which is customers. And this, of course, looks this way in the newsroom. But every company can benefit from having such a direct way to help prioritize back based on the ultimate outcomes the org is there to serve their customers, the viewers in your case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
yeah, that's awesome. That's very helpful. So let me switch gears a little bit. To talk about building this high performance culture and of course that's required, and you mentioned that as well, just the nature of the business demands that. How do you think about and I add a word in there which I hope you agree with. I add, when I talk about high performance, I like to add sustainable high performance, because anybody can kind of sprint for a day, week, month or so, but for real success we're looking at things longer term, and that sustainability comes in. So when you're helping people manage their longer term career and success in the newsroom, what are some of the key principles that you like to, root the team and the organization in?
Yeah, I do like to, as much as I've talked about at the start of this, being adapting and not, you don't necessarily knowing everything that's coming down the road years from now. I think at the person level, at the individual level, you can, chart paths for people, regardless of what changes with technology. You can chart, viable lanes that they can contribute to and things like that.
Mhm.
And that's something I've done and have always seek to do with people through my team is like, what are the possible lanes, as opposed to the job they were hired for that they can move into, and let's find out how to continue to tap into those and gain experience in them. And that to me is a motivating factor. It helps people, you know, whether even if they end up leaving the organization, they develop skills and it benefits them at an individual level, also benefits the org. For newsrooms and most I've been in several. The Inquirer is particularly good at this. Is the instant demand is almost the easier part. We're very good at like meeting the moment when there's a massive breaking news story. It's not hard to motivate a newsroom to cover an election or even fun like for us when the Philadelphia Eagles are in the Super Bowl. That's not hard to get people to like motivated and hyped up to do. They're really good at meeting the moment. And I think it's just a natural thing that journalists are trained to do. But yeah, it is that longer term, that steady and sustainable. How are you getting better? One less, or more blunt, I guess, thing we do frame is in our business, and it's probably true in a lot of them. You either are getting better or getting worse. It is very hard to stay the same working in journalism in this current era because everything is changing around you. So it's unrealistic that you're gonna stay the same. So you can either consistently get better, or you can consistently
Yeah,
get worse and fall further behind.
yeah.
And that's something that we are realistic about it, and we do communicate that. And for the most part, people are receptive to that.
Yeah, and that's a key. I would highlight that as well. That's a really helpful mindset and guiding principle, really, for everything. Because the society is today, it really is true. Unless you're getting better, you are getting worse. Just the new technologies are coming out, the new news are coming out, the new skills are needed to thrive. So ultimately, just by definition, if you're not picking those up, you're day by day, you're more obsolete. So that is a really helpful mindset
Hmm.
as a leader to be bringing to everybody versus somebody waiting for things to calm down. Because
Yeah.
when if you don't look back, like when in your career did you think something was calm? and calmed down, right? It's not the reality, right? So that's really great, I think, to share with everybody your experience with that. So, and you mentioned, a lot of people come in and they're happy to jump in their roles with to meet the big events and stuff, and that's probably what drives them into the journalism industry in the first place. But do you find people, as they're developing across different areas, do they cross over into management roles then? Is that a natural connection? And, how do you help? Is that a thing happen often? And how do you help those leaders thrive in those now management roles that they're not necessarily, their main skill set?
Yeah. It does happen. I haven't been a career manager, right? I do manage a team now, but I started my career as a reporter, and then I was
Hmm.
an editor in the more traditional sense,
Hmm.
literally working with words, changing stories, which I don't do a whole lot of
Hmm.
anymore. Now I'm an
Hmm.
editor in a strategic sense.
Hmm.
And so it does happen. Something that, I think there's that line, not, management isn't like, I don't think management has to be like the next step of success for someone, right? I think, and that's something that we've really looked at our org too, because I've seen it happen in other news orgs. There have been a lot of really good reporters who have been turned into bad editors, right? And editor is like a pseudonym for manager in a lot of traditional senses, but that doesn't always have to be true either. You can you can be an editor and not give them 15 direct reports if that's not a skill set.
Yes.
And if you do have someone who's good at leading people and things like that, there is management that doesn't have to be, in the traditional box, and you can
Hmm.
manage processes too. I think, you know, innovation's a buzzword, but innovation really is change management, right? It's managing change. And there's a lot of ways to do that without leading a team of, 10 direct reports. That said, you need to have that too. So we've really tried to, I've tried to do this specifically with my group, but as an org, like, you don't have to get like quote unquote promoted into management to be successful. Like, we need to create tiers where if someone is truly just a really good reporter, we need them to be able to excel at that and continue to move up, if you will, or whatever it is, and gain, more responsibility, but also, more compensation, things like that. So that's something we've looked at, and we've tried to like frame it where, it's not like you work your way up through non-management roles to get into management. That doesn't have to be
Perfect.
everyone's path.
Yeah.
And for us, one like technology is a huge, multi-position, sprawling adjacent field to
Hmm.
newsrooms now. And that area between, it's called product. A lot of times in news orgs, we refer to it as product, but the overlap between product and journalism has like really meshed. And
Hmm.
that's created a ton of pathways, particularly for newsroom people like looking to do more technical things. So that's one area, and there are several that we try to develop. But yeah, we talk about there's you can be a leader without being a manager, and vice versa. You can manage a process without being a leader of a team or people even.
I love that perspective, Ross. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, in a very different industry, and me as in a corporate tech space, I very much share your opinion, and it's really great to see this play out in your world as well. People have to play to their strengths and their desires for the next step, and success isn't the prescribed path forward. This probably comes into what you were shared earlier about an individual approach to what people are good at, what they're trying to achieve, and then creating those different pathways that suit them. That's that same exists in tech as well, right? Sometimes you're like, what makes you the best developer isn't necessarily becoming a manager, is not a skill set or a desire for that person either. And
Right.
it's
Yeah.
really important to recognize that and recognize that. And I think you mentioned the other part of that that's really critical, then recognizing that path can grow and including the compensation as well, so that people
Hmm.
don't feel like they have to move up in order to move up with the compensation level, that they have to move into a managerial role that's actually
Yeah.
going to diminish their, what they shine the best at. So that's a really great share. Thank you so much for. I love to see that principle play out in this totally different industry. I think it's a very strong approach for people and for the organization itself.
Yeah. Definitely.
How do you so you mentioned the newsroom can seem like, and it probably is the reality, that it feels like it's operating in probably in constant crisis mode. So, there's news stories again coming up, and then, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of downtime again with all the new things that are happening internally as well with the new technologies. So how do you help sometimes hone or help people shift into a more strategic thinking versus reactive mode, which is the environment is probably driving the reactive nature, but ultimately there is a need for the strategic thinking, which you clearly are very comfortable with. But how do we grow, how do you grow that with your team and yeah, with all these different pathways?
Yeah. One thing we utilize here that gets at that a little bit, I think, is we take like what's called a working group approach. So we form kind of working groups. You could call them like subcommittees, if you will. We call them working groups here of people with different skill sets maybe, but working on the same thing. It could be a mix of newsroom roles with a product person involved too, and have them focus on a larger term strategic initiative. And one thing that does is it avoids like the strategy people and the execution people being totally different. So we they need to be a little bit of the same. And when you have that, you've got more bandwidth to still get out because with newsrooms, yeah, 70% of the work roughly is just getting through the day. It really is, especially a news org like ours, and that might even be more extreme for like let's say a local broadcast station or something like that that literally has to be on air 4 times within 24 hours or something like
Hmm.
that.
Right, right.
A lot of it truly is getting through the day. You need to find space within that to still do strategic work and planning and flex different muscles. One way we've done that is small kind of working groups where if 4 people are missing quote unquote from like the daily operations because they're focused on this, it's you still have the infrastructure in place to get through the day because you're not taking all the skill set out of one area and having them, in meetings all day. So that's one way we try to balance skill sets. And some of that though is you really just fit it in when you can too, because there are drop everything moments, and
Yes.
it's a reality of the business, at least several, but particularly ours.
Awesome. It sounds like, you have such a good, varied approach with your team members, and you're so aware of the, even recognizing the place for the reactive mode, and then creating space for the strategic time and mix it. And I love your tip too about mixing the working group so that strategy execution is not siloed in different areas. This is like, sometimes feel like people ask you, oh, could you split yourself into like, three, or can we multiply you is more better probably way. Like the scaling of some of these approaches is then becomes a challenge, right? So even
Hmm.
as you're, doing this with your team, the team grows. If things are going well, the organization grows, right? New leaders emerge at different levels. Yeah, so I just wonder, how do you hit some of those challenges with, scalability of some of these approaches?
Yeah, there are different tactics that one thing that we do talk about, two, I think things that really help with that is one, having a plan for like what does like the if nothing's complete, what does like the status quo phase of something look like? If you're starting a new project or we're say going to cover a new topic in a different way, what does default status look like once we build the thing? And then where can you find efficiency within that? There's whether that's technology that helps through automation, whether it's training other people, things like that. The other really important thing we do here is you do have to let some things go. Not I would say like not every new project should be a life sentence, right? Like if we ask someone to say start a new email newsletter about a certain topic because we think there's an audience need there, we need to like make sure we're not asking that person like you've got to do this till the end of time now, right? There should be an offloading process. Or if, we meet the audience needs, but that starts to fizzle out, like we need to be aware of what we have and shut things down too. And that doesn't necessarily mean, it was a failure. It might have served a purpose for a moment in time, but let it go. And so constantly assessing what you can let go of or pull back on is a huge part of that in my view, at least, because not everything takes the same hardly anything takes the same amount of effort forever, right? The effort should be different levels of intensity at different states of it. And that said, it can get easy to just get into a habit and you never like reduce your focus on something and you just stack more and more. Trying to be aware of when you can pull back is another thing that I think really helps with that.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to like kind of ongoing prioritization,
Hmm.
and shifting things in view of what are we really trying to achieve, and then using that backwards to how we're spending time back. So that's a really great skill set to be investing in personally and helping others develop as well. I think to help, it seems like a path to success essentially. Um, so I know that you shared a lot of these really helpful approaches and mindset and some practical tips. But I know that always there's something more to be done. Like, is if I were to ask you, kind of what, do you see any obvious gaps that you are looking to address, or that you see that impact your organization, or do you even notice it industry wide that are, kind of not maybe keeping you up at night, or if you had a wish stick that you would say, okay, I would, have something to deal with this thing that's really painful for us.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think the thing in the keep you up at night department, it is that just there is a sense that in our business there is a lot we can't control, and particularly when technologies evolve and change, the climate for journalism, even in the U.S. Is goes through phases. I think as an industry we've even struggled keeping audience trust and things like that.
Yeah, right.
To make space for addressing all of those is difficult. And it's getting over like the hesitancy to, well, if I invest in this thing, by the time we get good at it, it could be irrelevant anyways, is like a real consideration. And so, sometimes there are some areas where can you make that still not be a waste of time? So say, can we got really good for a while at Twitter, right? All
Mm.
these folks did. Well, we were really good at that, and we invested a ton of time into it, and that had a longer shelf life. But now we largely automate, like at least from our brand accounts. It's like an RSS feed because the value's gone down so much, and the user reaction there has changed. So we are exploring, more like native social storytelling, right? And we we've gotten good at like the storytelling piece. We haven't figured out how to monetize it yet. And there's a fear of like, once we figure out how to monetize it, like the consumption pattern totally change and
That's
will
interesting.
be lost cause, or will
Yeah,
TikTok get shut down by the US government, like, and we just hired all these video people. So that is like, I don't have a solution for that. That is like in the keep you up at night department in media is a big one of just like, can you, when you pull the trigger to get good at something, what if you get good at it and then the value bottoms out right when that happens? And because that has happened several times.
that's interesting. I haven't heard it articulated that way before, but that's also almost kind of like that part of like getting people really good at change, and
Mhm.
you can get ahead of change fatigue, and you're managing it. But you're like, what if all you're pushing us, pushing your people into change and investment, and then it just bottoms out on you.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and then you can create disillusioned people as well because you're like, I just did this crazy thing. Why don't I just not do these next three things and they'll be gone?
Right.
So you can start hedging your bets that way a little bit.
Mhm.
That's interesting to
Yeah.
consider as a challenge, then how to keep your people motivated to no, no, okay, if we've decided as an organization to move on this, we still have to move on. And even with uncertainty, that's probably not going away anytime soon. There's inherent uncertainty with all of these new initiatives, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Do you see, when you were looking at your high performers, and I know that you likely work mostly with, kind of high performing individuals, do you see a specific need or any kind of patterns in the needs that they have? And how do you work to provide that to keep them intrigued and performing and keep going basically in the growth and fast-paced direction that's required today?
Yeah. I mean, I think, talent goes a long way, right? And I think you need to reward talent in any
Mm.
industry. We do really try to make sure we're doing that and both identifying who your most talented people are, and are they in the right position to maximize that talent? If not, how can you create that? And, you do need to give more than like kudos to people, right? You do need to like have a compensation structure that rewards people. One thing we've, talked about here and just from like a company strategy standpoint is like, how do we get better at preemptive retention? Like the worst thing you definitely, you don't want to like always be talking about, a new role or a change in compensation for someone when they have another job offer in hand. Because by the time you get to that stage, sometimes you can pull them back and you can convince them. And usually you're paying more when you have to do that
Yeah,
because they've already spent, 3 job interviews and a lot of time thinking about themselves in a new role. Like, how do you like prevent those? You're not going to prevent them. How do you minimize those situations from even occurring by preemptively identifying and rewarding talent? And that's something that, um, candidly, I don't think the media industry has been very good at. Part of it's because it's been resource strapped for so long, but we have got, other certain models have gotten better, right? And we've come out of kind of the real tough period, at least speaking for the Inquirer. We still have challenges, but we're a lot better off than this place was. And I wasn't even here, but like 15 years ago, we're actually better off as a business right now because we've developed a subscription business that's digital
Okay,
and
great.
it's not just decaying and things like that. Yeah, you can't just the same to not being reactionary. You have to like preemptively identify and reward talent to keep it engaged because and it's unrealistic to expect the other like I think it's fine too and to communicate even it's you're not going to have everyone performing at the same level, right? And if you were to like I think look at like a standard company and you even put it into a category, you probably have a small percentage of people who are true top performers. You probably have a small percentage of people who, are struggling and really need to develop to, make more noticeable contributions. And then you probably have a big middle of people who are doing their job. And I think that's okay. And I think sometimes, like, just in the way, especially in American, like corporate, we talk about, oh, you've always got to be at the top. Like, no, you're not going to have a full company of overperformers. It just doesn't exist. And I think being realistic that, like, you can have different expectations for different people. And most successful companies probably do need a big core of people who do their jobs, but you do need to identify and reward top talent within that. And then, yes, gradually you try to move people from that middle category
Yeah.
into the higher.
Yeah. Oh, I find that to be a very refreshing and a realistic view of looking at the organization, and that's healthy spread. Is just it's kind of is again, it's very realistic, and also helps set the right expectations for the right people as well, instead of kind of putting everybody in the same bucket. I find that really refreshing. Thank you for sharing that. Sometimes it's hard to say some of these things, I find, because there is this expectation that everybody's high performing. So let me just, I have a couple follow up questions because that was such a great loaded answer. I want to just pick at them a little bit. You mentioned working proactively to identify talent. Again, I absolutely agree. And just want to ask about how, if you could share some strategies and tips on how to do that proactively, because I could not agree more that when somebody's coming to you completely unhappy and with another job offer, it's a Hail Mary at that point and just not a good
Mhm.
strategy for developing your top, the top layer. So if I could just kind of pick at, say, like, do you have anything to share with our audience on how you proactively you find these people that are worth the investment? Because of course it is cooked to compensation as well.
Yeah. I mean, we do have and we continue to tinker with it, but we for years didn't do it in the past, 4 to 5. We have stuck to it and we do have a performance management system. And
Okay.
like, and I think they're important to have. And I think one thing that I don't know if we fully gotten this message across, but we're certainly trying and more people are buying into it is performance management, I think can be seen as like purely negative or it's like,
Yeah.
a report card and it should be like an identification process, right? It should also be a process that helps reward and strengthen news orgs. It's not always about like making someone better or telling them they need to do more. It should be like a somewhat transparent and it gets, the attention of, the top leaders of the company of like it should be revealing too. It should reveal where real success is happening. And I think when you frame it that way, it's like it's not like a bunch of suits in the corner coming up with a grade for somebody. It's no, what we're attempting to do here is what you just said, is identify a top talent and then start thinking about how we reward it, continue to develop it, give those people more opportunities. Having a system for it and talking about it that way, I think is one key piece of that.
I think it's critical, and I would totally highlight that again. And you're right; it can have such a bad rap that again you're like, "Ooh, can we talk about this?" But I think it's important because yet the flip side of that is, without a system and and a visible, transparent process, and you end up relying on organizations end up relying on subjective selection,
Yeah.
and that can be that's cloaked with all kinds of danger, right? Like kind of like the subjectiveness that we all have a bias baked into us individually, just like also like it can be stroke of luck of how much time you're spending with certain individuals. So it can really, the result of that can be that that some good talent falls right through the cracks because we didn't have a systemized blanket approach to make sure that their achievements percolate to the top
Mhm.
and to the right eyeballs. So I think it's really important to shine a light that you would never expect, say, from somebody who doesn't know much about the newsroom, to say that there is a systemized performance management system scorecard situation to really identify this. I think that's a very mature and important practice to highlight.
Yeah. And it's something, like I said, we're continually still tinkering with and getting
Of
better
course.
at, but
Hmm.
and it's skills based. It's not like just because you had the most read story, you're at the top of the list, right? Though it's not that. And so you're looking at skills
And
and
that's what I was going to ask you about, because I was going to ask you, like, what kind of outcomes do you use? That was the
yeah.
flip side. My other question, I said, pick at it, was how to identify the leaders, and then it was kind of how do you define performance? I'm sure you mentioned balanced scorecard, so there's lots of different aspects. But can you highlight to us some of the key buckets that you kind of look at, to that and is that rooted specifically to the newsroom and the experience of what it really takes to succeed in this environment?
Yeah, we do have like company-wide KPIs, right? Every company
Hmm.
does, and we have certain metrics, and we do look at how individuals can contribute to those, but might be specific to kind of our industry. We don't give some places do. We don't give like hard numeric like outcome goals to a reporter because I think if you were to give a reporter a total views goal for their stories for the year or something like that, the route to like getting the highest number that might not be through the best journalism, right? So and the Inquirer's a subscriber business, so we don't just need people to read us. We need people to read us and read us at a level that they think it's worth paying for, and that's a different bar to meet. So there's not one metric to success is one way to look at it, and it really is an evaluation period of several different things. But we do try to stay away from, nobody has quotas, things like that. It's an evaluation of of skill sets and outcomes and kind of the impact. And I think you can measure impact beyond just a specific set of KPIs or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's actually that's the flip side of the systems that you highlight. Like if you choose just it seems like the easiest thing, be like, oh, top viewership or something like that, but that can actually be uh, promoting undesired behaviors. Actually, so that's really important to look at a well-rounded area. Sometimes it seems like the right thing, but actually ends up in a totally weird
Yeah.
space you don't want to go to. That's again a very, very mature way to look at it. I really appreciate that. Uh, okay, well, I think this was a great conversation. You answered all of my hard-hitting questions, let's say, that I had. I'm so pleased with some of the parallels we were able to draw, and highlight some of from the newsroom. I have to say that I learned a lot. It's a much more complex environment than it even seems. Some of this internal paths and that you've highlighted challenges and the paths internally are really interesting. Is there anything else that you would add at the end, just to close off our dialogue today, that you want to make sure that comes across to the audience?
Yeah, the only thing sometimes I do try to add when I talk about journalism
Yeah.
and media is it really is, it's an information business. I think sometimes, it can get conflated with, and there is a public service commission to it, things like that. Is I always try to reinforce that, like, what journalism is it's an information business. You're giving people information. Not all information is like life or death, right? Some of it is purely like some of it's like, is this restaurant any good? Is this a movie worth seeing? Is this pro athlete earning their money like in a wink sense, like a fun, like lighthearted sense, things like
Hmm.
that. Journalists also like they live in the same neighborhoods that people we all have different versions of the same problem, I guess. So, journalism is a very unique industry, but it actually and why I think this conversation, made sense, and I was intrigued by coming on the podcast, is there is a
Yeah.
lot of parallels
Yes.
between the stuff that people in newsroomers are working on and the people working in a tech startup are working on. There's a ton of similarities, so it's not as isolated of this kind of far-flung unique field as sometimes I think its rep gets.
Yeah, I will have to totally agree with you there. Like I'm actually blown away by the parallels, the way you've talked about them. And I always do like to come back to I have this view of back to fundamentals and basics. We are all people living in a society, doing our best, getting through our day. And you're right, you can see yourself as a steward of information. Some of it is life changing, and some of it is just about quality and enjoyment of the environment that we live in. And that's
Mhm.
a really if I walk this as as a steward of information, and then also kind of catching up with the technology, getting that information to us in the channels and the venues that are relevant in society today, it quickly adds that to that kind of that we can relate to one another and realize that we're all dealing with similar challenges, just on the other side of the screen or the publishing lens
Sure. Yeah.
that you're going through. I really appreciate that wrap up and this conversation. This was really enlightening for me personally. Thank you so much, Ross.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite. I've enjoyed chatting, Sandra.
Yes, me too, very much so. All right, have a great day.